Here in DC, we love a good debate, and there's an incredibly spicy one playing right now at Arena Stage. The Motion, the bold new play from Obie Award-winning playwright Christopher Chen, where a debate between four scholars quickly transitions into a real-life experiment, where the scientists become the subjects. Things like basic human rights come into question. Who deserves love? Who deserves to live? And most importantly, who gets to decide what it means to be human? It's playing now through June 14th at Arena Stage, DC's Tony Award-winning theater down at the Wharf. If you like theater that actually makes you think, grab your tickets at arenastage.org.
This is Your City Could Be Better, because it could be. I'm David Plotz. If you love your city and still complain about it, you're in the right place. Chicago is opening its 82nd public library branch inside the Obama Presidential Center in June. So it's going to be a library in a library. And as in so many of our cities, public libraries are a treasure in Chicago. Chicago recently turned every student ID card into an automatic library card. So every Chicago kid can now borrow and borrow and borrow. Chicago's put life-saving opioid overdose medication at every branch. It's opened the first ever food pantry inside a branch. It has 3 branches attached to subsidized housing. And Chicago's libraries loan way more stuff than just books and movies. In short, they are amazing. They're a treasure. They're a gold mine. They are an urban delight of the highest order. And I'm joined by Jacoby Cochran, the senior host of CityCast Chicago, one of the original hosts of the CityCast network, to talk about how your city could be better if it had imaginative libraries like Chicago does. So Jacoby, welcome to Your City Could Be Better. Well, you've hosted it before, so you didn't be welcome.
No, I'm excited to be back on the guest side of things. And, I'm so glad you all wanted to talk about libraries. This is quickly become one of my favorite Chicago resources to brag about.
Well, let's start with your particular relationship to libraries. So you are engaged in a quest, a wonderful quest, which is that you're visiting every single library in Chicago. What gave you that idea? How's it going? How many are you at?
All right, so I have to spread the credit around a little bit. I'm going to start with our colleague, Ali Vallarta out in Salt Lake City, who over the last few years has visited every park and bar in Salt Lake County. And that inspired me, but I started looking at how many are in Chicago, and we got over 600 parks just in Chicago and thousands of bars. And I was
bars, you probably could not do it. You couldn't do it. They'd open new ones faster than you could.
I'm not even going to try. And so then I was like, maybe I could do like the best like old school taverns or the best bars with funny names or something. But I ended up going away from that, and I let the idea sit on the shelf for a while. And then a year ago, we did an episode with a young lady, shout out to Anna Lee, who hit every stop of the Chicago Ale. She rode every train in the city in record time. And that got me back to thinking, what is something that would take me across the city like I was on the Ale, would give me a finite number to actually hit, though it's not in the hundreds like out in Salt Lake. And there have been a few people in Chicago who have started this process. Shout out to one of our longtime listeners, Vero. And so I picked the library, and ever since, I've now done, I want to say 60 of them. I've gotten to learn more about what's available at each branch. I've gotten a return to my childhood branch, and it's allowed me to tour Chicago with like new eyes.
How long do you spend in a branch?
That's a very good question. It really depends on how many people are there, if a branch manager is available. So, and at the least, I'm there for maybe 20 minutes, walking through, taking some video, taking in all of the art at the branch, what kind of resources are available. But on a good day, if the branch manager is extremely helpful, like recently I met 2, one on the north side at Budlong Woods, shout out to Tom, and then one on the south side, shout out to Kishana. And both of them walked me through their reading gardens, let me see some of the art that might have been tucked away in the branch. Tom showed me a plant that he got from his mom that was in the branch. Kishana took me down to their community closet where they're giving away clothes to families who need it. And so I could end up being there for like an hour if the people there are really chatty.
Okay, so what is the most surprising or wondrous, I was going to say wonderful, and then I realized wondrous thing that you have discovered in a Chicago library so far?
All right, so I've run into quite a few things, from food pantries, like you mentioned, the community closet. But one of the first branches I went to was on the south side, and it was the West Pullman branch. And they had this really small fish tank. And it was actually the first library video I posted. I was like, every library needs a fish tank. And all these people got in my comments like, okay, have you been to Sulzer? They got a fish tank. And I was like, well, no, I have never been, so I'm going to go. And I'm glad no one in the comments spoiled it, because I pulled up to Sulzer, walked through the branch into their teen space, and they had a koi pond in there, David. I'm not kidding you. There were at least 7 or 8 fish in there. They had like these overgrown monstera plants that were wrapping around this like open pond. There were lizard tanks and fish tanks decorating the room. It was the last thing I expected to see walking in.
So why do you think we're here to talk about how your city could be better with that? So that sounds amazing. It sounds so wonderful. Who doesn't want to see a koi pond? Why is it good for a public library in Chicago to have a koi pond and lizards and monstera plants?
I think what's beautiful about it is the fact that we have 81 branches, and that's the only branch I've seen it at, is because it represents the people who work there and the people who are in that neighborhood. I learned that there was a particular librarian who worked in the teen space who loved animals, who loved fish. And so it was a project they had taken up through COVID. And at a time in which libraries were one of the first places, if your building was large enough to let you social distance, started welcoming people back into the space, programming for young people. And the fact that they were coming back to a building that, also felt like an aquarium, that felt like an adventure. I walked around that room and there were 3D printers and there were like 1,000 Dungeons and Dragons figures. Like the space screamed, be here, belong here, like you are welcomed here. This isn't, a lot of kids might be like, oh, I don't want to go to the library. I don't want to do homework. I don't want to think about school anymore. It's so much more. And I think you need those motivators.
I spent a lot of time at colleges recently, and one of the things you realize if you go to nice colleges in America is that they are incredible third spaces. There's always like a place to have something to eat. They have great chairs. Like any college, there's like always somewhere to sit that's really nice.
I spent so much time at campus at the library.
Yeah. But actually in most public spaces in America and most sort of like even, commercial space, they're not usually that welcoming unless you spent a whole lot of money, unless you've paid a lot of money to belong, or this is at your home and it's a very fancy place that you essentially put up money so that you can have this comfort. The thing about libraries that is so cool, this is why it's great to have a koi pond, is that they are third spaces to enjoy. And it's not because you paid a lot. It's not because, of your status. It's not because of something, unique about you. It's like, that's why they're special.
100%. We often talk when it gets cold outside. One of the first places you can go where there's a warming center is all of the Chicago library branches. If you are someone who needs a place for childcare, there's so many events taking place at our library. It's a place for us to go and vote in Chicago. And so, the more branches that I've been to, the more resources I've gotten to see moving around the city. I've also realized that the libraries have evolved. I had a sense that I was going to go and I had to be real quiet, don't interrupt anybody, kind of timid. And some of the library branches was like, bro, we have a recording studio in here. The kids are in here playing video games in the afternoon. It's not a sort of ruler on the top of the hand kind of space as I remember it as a kid.
You can be noisy in a library now?
Yeah, they got drums, guitars. Like they try to soundproof the room, but no, there's a television in some of our libraries where kids can, you are out of your mind, David. You got to be loud in the library. And I think it encourages them to invest in more multi-level libraries so you can have individual space. There are some where like the children's spaces in the basement, so it doesn't interact with the adult space as much. But there are some smaller branches that have had to make concessions where things are on top of each other. And I agree. Some branch managers have looked me in the face and are like, I don't like what it's become. It's no longer a library. It's now a community center for young people. But I hear that and I just light up, because our librarian when I was a kid was a little bit of a stickler, would have hated the idea of us playing Madden in here or kids on the computer playing Roblox.
So how did you use libraries as a kid? And would your childhood have been different had you not gone to the library? Mine definitely would have been.
100%. Yeah, one of the first things I can remember is my mom taking each of our siblings to the library on our own. It was one of those places where we were able to have individual time with our mom, and we could talk to her about our interests, and she would spend time looking through the books we were interested in. And as we got older, the sites we were like spending online. She really wanted to know us. And the library was an easy place where our interests came to life and she could just listen. And as we got older, we moved down the street from our elementary school. So through 6th and 8th grade, that's when I started walking to school, started riding my bike to school. And my local library branch, Brainerd, was the place that we met up after school. That was our home base that wasn't home. And so it was a place where I learned, outside of I went to the same school, kindergarten through 8th grade for the most part. I had the same 30 kids pretty much my whole life. That's where my Chicago sort of exploded.
You know the difference between somebody who can sing and somebody who can sang? Those certain iconic voices that stop you in your tracks and make you feel something that you didn't even know you needed to feel. Whitney, Anita, Diana, Aretha, Tina. The Gay Men's Chorus of Washington, D.C. is celebrating the music of these legendary soul icons and the anthems they gave us in one spectacular night. Soul Divas. Songs like Respect, I'm Coming Out, How Will I Know? Lady Marmalade, Proud Mary, Sweet Love, The Best, and so many more. Perform with the full heart and talent of GMCW, all of their small ensembles, and the Gen Out Youth Chorus. You can expect an evening that is as joyful as it is over the top, with stunning costumes, dance numbers, and projections. June 6th and 7th at the Lincoln Theater in Washington, D.C. Tickets are going fast, so visit gmcw.org to get yours today.
Petworth Porch Fest is coming up on May 30th from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. Petworth turns into a walkable music festival, the biggest porch fest in the DMV. Over 400 acts, 160 porches, rock, jazz, folk, go-go funk, something for everyone. From international touring acts to neighborhood dad garage bands. We'll even be there. Come say hi to us outside of the main stage from 5 to 8 p.m. Not sure where to start? Check the schedule at the new Porch Finder tool at petworthporchfest.com.
All right, let's go to how Chicago libraries are reimagining. You've already touched on it a little bit. But what are some of the things that are not books that can be borrowed or taken from Chicago libraries?
I love this. Some of our branches have what's called a library of things. And so I wrote down some of my favorite. You can rent, if it's available, a popcorn machine, a karaoke machine with mics and speakers, one of those bounty hunter treasure detectors on the beach. We got those. We got plenty of binoculars for bird watching. You can get a sous vide wand, a pasta maker, guitars, jumper cables. I just had to help my brother jump his car a couple of weeks ago. And he called me like, where can I get some jumper cables? I was like, the library. A radon detector, sewing machine, cornhole game. Like the list goes on and on. And pots and pans, a cake pan. It's no longer just in service of books and physical media. There's also this desire to be a part of people's daily lives.
One of the things you mentioned is that Chicago's now turned student IDs into library cards. What's the benefit of that?
Next to New York, we have the most branches of a public library system in the country. And so the idea that with one decision, hundreds of thousands of students, regardless of what neighborhood they live in, regardless of their status, aren't having to jump through potentially additional hoops to get a library card. I got one in the last year, and it's not the most difficult thing to do, but at a time where young people feel, particularly young immigrants feel afraid to go places that aren't home and school, it's nice to know that not only can you come in and use your school ID, but the amount of branches that have know your rights campaign materials, how to spot ICE materials, local Migros Watch and resource groups. We talk about what does it mean to empower young people, give young people access to opportunity. And I think one of the ways you do it is through programs like this, where you just make it easy as possible for them to walk into a building and use a computer, access a tutor, get a popcorn maker, whatever the case may be.
Do you know if there are any results of this so far? Do you know if there's been an upsurge in borrowing by kids? Is it too soon to tell?
So this actually was birthed out of a pilot program that launched in 2022. It was only in a few of our neighborhoods. And they said since then, there's been a 63% increase in library access among economically disadvantaged students and 81% amongst English language learners. And so simply by giving students the knowledge that their student ID is going to work this way. More people have felt comfortable coming into the library. Over the last year I've been doing this, the more branches I've gone to, I've seen more young people taking advantage of the computers. I've seen young people in there working on science projects, young people in there writing music, young people for whom English isn't their first language going through a tutoring session. And I think at a time, especially in Chicago, where you can open up any newspaper and someone's talking about a teen trend, the trends show that teens are interested in what the library has to offer if it's made available and maybe sometimes a little cool.
Library talk. The teen trend is libraries.
Yes.
Teen trend, libraries. What other Chicago library changes or updates or revelations have you seen that really impressed you and feel important to you?
I mean, the food pantry was deeply important. This was at a time in which SNAP benefits were being cut. People were going to have to start making changes to be eligible for SNAP benefits. And so you had a lot of mutual aid in Chicago, but the Greater Chicago Food Depository and some of those networks made it clear we may not be able to handle the influx of food insecure people. And I think that's one thing I've seen from, growing up to now. It feels that the library, individual branch managers, and then at times the city at whole have said, how can we respond to the issues of the day? I watched in real time them respond to the growing aggression from ICE. I'm watching them respond in real time to food insecurity. And, even the last few years, expanding weekend hours. Like how do we make ourselves more available?
Is it your sense that in Chicago, the policies and the choice to have a food pantry, the choice to have a koi pond, or the choice to extend hours, that belongs to a branch manager, or is that some leader at the city level who's deciding that?
I think it really depends. For example, the program that gives access to all students, that is a partnership between Chicago Public Schools and Chicago Public Library. The koi pond is something an individual branch manager or branch employee can make. But then things like the food pantry, I think these are born out of people in the neighborhood asking for these things, for people inside of the Chicago Public Library system making suggestions. I think seeing the library as a place to experiment with social programming, with new events for young people. How do we provide more classes and programming for our seniors? But the fight isn't always smooth. One thing I've learned about, for example, public housing in the city of Chicago that's attached to branches is that the neighborhood didn't always, open up for that. But in the years since those branches have opened up, they've become, for a lot of the branch managers I talk to, they're like, well, yeah, we have housing here now. It's not a thing that is overly focused on, but it's not a thing that people are turning out to oppose. So some of these programs haven't always been welcomed with open arms, but I'm so glad that we're still trying them.
So one of my favorite changes in DC libraries, or one of my favorite qualities in the DC public libraries, is weekend and evening hours.
Mm-hmm.
My own library usage is really concentrated in weekend and evening hours. And it's so much easier for me. If I'm out running an errand on a Sunday, I can just swing by the library and pick up a book or just check something out. Is that something that you guys have in Chicago?
Yeah, and I want more of it. This is one of those places that I have to check my privilege. It's kind of like when we talk about public transit and we talk bad on Chicago public transit. People are like, what are you talking about? Y'all got all of them trains. Y'all got so much available to you. How could you complain? And it feels the same with the library, because as I've been posting some of these branch hours, people are like, oh, I'm so envious. But I see only 4 hours open on Sunday across, maybe 60 or so branches as room for improvement. And I know that costs money and we need more staff members, but the library budget is not something that is, overwhelmingly protected. In our last budget season, there were calls to make cuts. And luckily, a lot of people came out to advocate for reversing those. And ultimately, the library was given more money. But those weekend hours, I'd love to see more, but I also know that, just expanding the 1 to 5 window on Sundays has made a big difference for people.
So in my hometown of Washington, they've built a bunch of new libraries in the past decade, and the head of the DC Public Library system has done a great job of really evangelizing libraries, and he's renovated or built some really wonderful buildings. And there are a couple of libraries down in southeastern DC that are they're spectacular. They're so spectacular that people will literally take sort of field trips just to go see these libraries. They're stunning buildings. And I think if you asked the people who design those buildings, or maybe the people who commission those buildings, they would say, creating a beautiful building, making it architecturally impressive and stunning is a way of making this even more inviting to the public. It's a way of sort of celebrating a public good, and it's going to make it more likely to be used. On the other hand, they're probably more expensive than building boxy buildings.
Yeah.
So do you think it is important to make libraries physically interesting, beautiful, and awesome, or not?
I'm gonna be honest, one of the things that motivated me to start this was I think libraries are aesthetically beautiful.
Yeah.
Like across the city of Chicago. One of the oldest branches is Blackstone at Hyde Park, and I used to live down the street from it. And it is this Athenian temple. It is gorgeous and it stands out. And I've also visited some branches that have opened in the last 7 years, these like glass masterpieces. And the excitement the building gives me to walk in is undeniable. At the same time on this journey, you hear 81 branches and you think, oh, well, Chicago has 77 community areas. That means at least there's one in every one of those community areas. And well, no, 8 of them don't have one. And there are neighborhoods that are still fighting for a permanent location, while some really beautiful buildings are planned in to replace branches in Woodlawn or added in Humboldt Park that would have this subsidized housing component. And so it tears me because on the one hand, I want to spread the wealth around. If you've got millions of dollars in capital funds that can go to one building, well, how many buildings can we get for that money? But I don't want to shortchange a library. You know, 3 of the more recent buildings that we've had in Little Italy and the Northtown and Independence branch, these were all a part of the public housing partnership with Chicago Public Library. And these buildings are gorgeous. I'd want to live there. I want to visit that branch. And so at the end of the day, I think libraries should be beautiful. I think they should be like iconic symbols of the neighborhood. I think the neighborhood should have a say in what they look like, but you can't divorce the fact that, you know, if you're going to give millions of dollars to one while other branches are sort of still small and still trying to hustle to modernize, it begs the question if we're making the smartest investment.
I mean, it's just a really tough question, because I think if you look at human history, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world is literally a library. And they're true cathedrals. If you think of a cathedral as a place of religious worship, these are cathedrals of learning, great libraries. And I think it's really important to have monuments. It makes you feel like the world is greater and the human imagination is extraordinary, and what a celebration of this value of learning and of knowledge and of community it is. And that the beauty and awe-inspiringness of that building contributes to it. But we also live in a world of limited resources, and you have to balance it. I think it's a fascinating question.
I'm obsessed with the Chicago architecture tours. And one thing you'll always hear, regardless of who your docent is, like the story of Chicago can be told in our buildings. And because we have branches that have been around from the late 1800s till now, the story of Chicago can be told in our library branches as much as they can be told in our evolving skylines. And I think what a library says about your priorities as a society, what the resources inside say about what you believe your, residents and neighbors should have access to. But I do think they also beg the question of like, yes, is beauty and aesthetic more important than accessibility across the city? And I love the fact that right now we are grappling with those very questions in Chicago, because I would, we've planned some really beautiful future libraries, including like the Obama Center, but I'd argue I would trade 1 or 2 of those in the moment, right? Like in the short term for, an Avondale to get, a branch, or, for some of these other neighborhoods to get their first ever public branch.
Well, that's a good way to take us to our next to last question, which is, are there any library ideas that have not yet taken root that you hope would take root in Chicago that would make your libraries even better?
I think a few of the ideas that come to mind first are things that we are already trying, whether it's the public housing, whether it's the food pantry. One thing that's currently being in conversation is really expanding our cross-library delivery system. There's a lot of lag right now because of just the number of delivery drivers isn't what it once was. And so I know people are still advocating for, how can we hire more staff members? Like, how can we not just be adding programming, but also how can we make sure that, the people who are working there feel taken care of?
All right, Jacoby, last question for our main segment. What can listeners in other cities take away from our conversation to make their city better?
I think this conversation, my hope is for people listening, is a reminder of a resource, a community center, and a lifeline in your city that maybe you've been taking for granted, or maybe you've only interacted with selfishly. Because what I realize is I only go to the library closest to me. I'm not using it as an opportunity to explore my city, meet new neighbors, get out into different neighborhoods and see what's going on. And so if it is a resource that you are using very limited or not at all, like change that. There is something there for you, my hope. And if it's not there, find a way to advocate for it. How can we bring that to our library? How can we make use of unused auditorium space? How can we bring more programming for young people? How can we, I was at a branch exploring, and I'm glad the librarian asked me this. She was like, what do you do? And I told her, I host a podcast. And she was like, okay, well, we don't have anybody teaching the kids podcast. And like, do you want to come, like, be available to the library as a resource as much as it's available to you? And so that's a personal goal I'm holding myself to, not just visit and take beautiful pictures, but become a resource for Chicago Public Library as well.
So if there are a lot of like White Sox podcasts coming out of Chicago libraries in the coming years, you'll be to blame.
I got you.
Let's go to our word on the street segment, Jacoby, our second segment. Your Chicago Bears. I don't know if they're your Chicago Bears. They are.
Yes, they are. They are mine. They are mine, especially at this moment. They've been mine my whole life, but
they've been okay.
Right now, we're doing pretty damn good.
So they are threatening to move to a far suburb of your city, or possibly even all the way over the state line into Hammond, Indiana, which is, I guess, a distant suburb of Chicago in some fashion.
In some respects.
So the question I have for you is, should a team be allowed to keep the name Chicago Bears if they are not in Chicago? At what point would you stop feeling any loyalty to a Bears team? I was just doing a little Google mapping, and Hammond is not that much further from Indianapolis than it is from northwestern Chicago suburbs. So if you're in a northwestern Chicago suburb and you're trying to get to Hammond, Indiana to go to a game, it's not that much closer than if you lived in Indianapolis, which is the capital of a whole other state. Mm-hmm. And so maybe should they be called the Indiana Bears if they move to Hammond?
Hell no. Because I want to be clear. Hammond I could throw a rock from Chicago and hit Hammond. Like, very easily. We share bodies of water. We share streets. People go there for cheap gas, cheap cigarettes, and during this time of the year, cheap fireworks all the time. It's illegal to sell fireworks, like good fireworks, in Chicago and in Illinois. So we in Northwest Indiana all the time. And to be honest, we like to sometimes claim the Jackson 5. I know they're from Gary, but we like to remind people they came up to Chicago and some of their bigger performances took place here and not there. And so I've gone on record in saying this entire process has been headache inducing. And I understand it from all sides. The Bears want to own their stadium. They obviously want to play the leverage game to get as much public money as possible. And so I'm not surprised that we're at this point. Two, I think the team, as long as they are within reasonable distance to the city proper, especially given all the other teams that have moved away across the country, I don't think we should hold ourselves to that bar. Chicago has all of our teams at this moment in the city proper, and we take a lot of pride in that. But I do think if you are a hop, skip, and a jump away from the city, you keep the name. Because at the end of the day, there's 100 plus years of history in that name. And so it would take quite some time for Arlington Heights or Hammond to do enough work to be deserving of passing that name over. And so again, on some days, I don't care where they go, because if they go to Hammond, it's 9 minutes from my mom's house. I don't mind making that trip. But I think we get to keep the name as long as we don't move to, Jacksonville down the road, or Austin, Texas, or Sacramento. Like, then obviously. But Hammond, Arlington Heights, the name is still Chicago. The name is still Chicago regardless.
I mean, there were those New York teams that played in New Jersey. In fact, may still play. I think the Giants still play in New Jersey.
Yeah, the Giants and the Jets is both in New Jersey. Again, I don't pretend to understand the relationship between New York City and New Jersey. I know they got like a little freaky thing going on over there where they love and hate each other at the same time. Chicago doesn't pretend to love Northwest Indiana or pretend to love Arlington Heights. And so we really got beef with both, but I think at this point, a lot of fans will agree the trip to and out of Soldier Field right now as an experience point does need to change. And I wish it would change there, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen.
Jacoby Cochran, host of CityCast Chicago, thanks for coming on Your City Could Be Better. You should listen to Jacoby every weekday on CityCast Chicago.
5 years and running. I appreciate you making time for me.
That's all for today's episode of Your City Could Be Better. I'm your host, David Plotz. Our producers were Lizzie Goldsmith, Priyanka Tilve, Jacoby Cochran, and Simone Alicea. Our music is by Carl Christensen. If you are enjoying the show, tell your friends, rate the show, leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back next week with another conversation about how your city could be better. Talk to you then, quietly though, in a library tone of voice.